Hello and welcome, and in today's video I want to make this one a sort of a never follow-up video, which I have done quite a few of late, and this one is going to be about the left and the protest movement and my views on such things. And I pull no punches when I make a video like this. It's as honest as the day is long, and I'll say what's right and what's wrong, and where I think things need to go and where things shouldn't be going. And in my last video I talked about the political art that accompanies such demonstrations, such protests, and I think should be an integral part of the movement, and how in my last video I was saying about how I feel that a lot of that very colour is being drowned out. And it's kind of ironic that on one hand the very movement that talks about diversity talks about colour and is all about standing up for having a world full of life and variety and all of these different things, and celebrating, how things should be, is wanting to have, as I said in my last video, is wanting to have banners which are very corporate and are devoid of that very colour, and that colour is what gives the movement life. That, as I said in my last video, that sense of individuality of people coming along with their own homemade art is what gives the movement life. And yet what you see, a mass of mass-produced banners that were made in some print workshop, i.e. some printing company which has done very well out of all of this because they're getting all these contracts and they're just, as I said, mass producing this stuff, and it's taken away the very soul of the movement, in my opinion, because art is meant to be about expression and it's meant to be about individuality, and yet this is like unifying everything and sort of like trying to make everything look the same. This whole corporateness which seems to be big in the movement right now, and it's just like meaningless. It's lost that meaning, it's lost that sense of meaning. And perhaps I don't want this video to be about art in political life, but I thought I'd just sort of like follow on from that and just say those things whereby I can see where things have gone, and it's very sad. And perhaps it's not just this. It's not just the fact that they're trying to get rid of that colour by drowning it out with all this sort of corporate image. We're becoming sort of lefty PLC. Is that where the movement is going to go? It's going to become like a respectable corporation or something? You know? And I find that quite worrying. And I find it quite worrying that you've got people involved in the movement who've been involved in the movement throughout their whole lives. A lot of the older lefties, and I would probably still consider myself to be a younger one because I'm below the age of 50 or 60. But a lot of the older ones who have been involved in the movement, throughout their lives, going way back probably into the 70s or even before then, cannot start to see that, hang on a minute, the movement isn't what it used to be. And change is important, change is part of life, we all need to change and develop. But it's sort of like I have very mixed feelings with how the movement has gone, because I believe wholeheartedly in the left, I believe wholeheartedly in what they stand for. I believe in racial equality, sexual equality, in disability rights, looking after the environment, standing up for those who have no rights, for workers' rights, and basically just trying to make a better world for everybody to live in. They're all things, that I believe in. And all the things, and probably many others which I haven't mentioned, which the left is all a part of. And that's why I belong on the left, whether the left wants me or not is another matter. Because obviously, as I think I've pointed out in another video, there are times when I'm not really welcomed because of my religious beliefs. Again, the left to talk about diversity and sort of like, that, he used that word diversity, which perhaps is something for another video, and yet there are some people who are made to feel very much unwelcome. But that's obviously another subject matter perhaps. But, all of those things which I've mentioned and many others are things that the left is about. And I believe strongly in left-wing politics. And I get enthusiastic about these sort of ideas and concepts and sort of the debate around these issues. But I worry about where things are going. And you'll get some people who will say, well, it cannot remain in the past. No, that's true. But yet again, if it goes down the model of being like a corporate thing, is that good? And it's sort of like, well, where are things going? Today is As I look at my calendar, I think according to my calendar, it is the 16th of March 2019. Today in London, there will be the annual, as I consider it to be, if it's not called off, because the weather's not particularly wonderful today, but if it's not called off, there will be an annual anti-racism demonstration that will march through London and will have speeches at the end. And I'm not there. I'm not there for good reasons. But I still believe in such things, and I hope even with the bad weather that it still goes ahead for those people who will be involved today. Because it's an important thing. But what I find quite worrying is not just the fact that they will have an almost drowning out of good art on the demonstration today, with all this sort of corporate image type banners. You will find still that there is some good things on, good bits of art, and so there should be. But what you'll find is that the movement is going down a route that I find quite worrying. The grassroots left movement is going down a very worrying sort of time right now, I believe, and that's how I feel. And maybe, it's by speaking out and by saying what I think needs to be said that we get to change things, and change things hopefully for the better. It's not by just carrying on as business as usual. We need to carry on, and it's important to carry on, but if things go down this route that it seems to be going, then perhaps the movement isn't going to be what it was in the past. Some people knock the 70s. The establishment do not like, and they make this perfectly clear, they do not like Jeremy Corbyn, and they make it abundantly clear. The left supports Jeremy Corbyn, and so they should be, but obviously he's still working within the establishment, i.e. he's not wanting to revoke the system. So, although, you'll get headlines about how he's a communist and how he's a Marxist and all of these things, and how, he's going to be a danger to the system and everything, and to really frighten people. That he's this dangerous person. To the left, he's probably not as dangerous as what people have him out to be. I.e., they believe in him, and they believe in what he stands for, and they can see that he's wanting to take the Labour Party back to its roots, which is the right thing to do. But obviously he's still safe in the sense in that he's still going to be working with the establishment. He's not going to be working to get rid of the establishment or to be a complete threat to the establishment. And that's not because I don't think that he's a bad person. He's very good at what he does. but getting away from the headlines that you'll see in newspapers, he's probably not going to be, you know, an anti-establishment thing. Still going to be good, and he's going to bring in a much more left-wing sort of Labour Party than what they've had in a long time, which is a good thing. But it's still, you know, outside of that. On the left, they still don't see that he's going as far as what he could be. And one of the things I remember seeing not too long ago was how the Tory government were trying to say that if he gets into office, he'll take us all back to the 70s. Well, I have a few things to say about that. What's wrong with the 70s? The music was better. Yes, the times were darker. There was some bad things going on in the world. Yet again, there are bad things going on in the world right now. And economically and politically, it was a very dark time. But I guess the thing which the Tories are worried about, or what the establishment are worried about, is the fact that the power of the unions was much stronger back then than what it is now. And they worry that basically this is going to see the end of their way of life. And this is the whole thing. This is what they worry about. But you know, it was quite a powerful time when it comes to, as far as I'm concerned, and other people can pick me up on this one, I might be wrong, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and you know, looking back on the 70s, you had things like a 3-day week, and whereby the unions had the government, you know, under a stranglehold, whereby the 3-day week was about the fact that the power was only on for 3 days of a week, if I remember rightly. And the miners were, you know, even back in the 70s and before what happened in the 80s, the miners had enormous power, and unions were strong and very strong. Towards the end of the 70s, there was probably strikes throughout the whole of the 70s and industrial action. But the end of the 70s was marked by such things, and was marked by bins not being collected, and you know, even stories about, you know, bodies being left, and the army having to come in and do the jobs of the fire brigade and, you know, ambulance service. And you know, that's what the establishment are very much afraid of. They're afraid of people having power. You know, they want us all to vote for MPs, you know, and to not be out in the streets. And whereas I believe in voting, the biggest amount of power that we have as people and as human beings is through street politics. It's not through Parliament, although you vote for your local MP when the time is right. But the greatest way in which we have power is through the streets, because that's what makes the politicians sit up and listen. That's what makes them think. It's not through just putting a cross on a box every 4 years. And that's why we need to have good street politics. We need to have people on the streets, either involved in union action or involved in demonstrations. Because the more they see that we're out there making a noise and showing them that we can and we do have the power, then they will take notice. They will not take notice, and they will not change things if people do not do that. If people are not out on the streets and are not involved in street politics, in grassroots politics. But looking back on the past, when you could see these quite amazing demonstrations, I mean demonstrations are going on all the time, and they'll probably have a good turnout today, no doubt, of people marching through London. But looking back on the past, whereby you could get huge turnouts, hundreds of thousands. In the case of the Iraqi war, there was about 1 million plus people who marched through London, and that shows opposition, and it's important to have that sort of mass movement. And for me, I think, looking back is important, because you need to see how things used to be. And how things could be again. And people are still demonstrating. They're demonstrating every year. They're demonstrating every day or every month. It's not dead. The movement hasn't died, and we need to have a stronger movement than what we currently have, I think. But we need to have a movement that is going to show real strength, not just something which will fade away. In my last video on sort of political art, and one of the things which I was saying is that we don't want to become like the proverbial snail, whereby you poke it in the eye and it goes back into its shell. And I can't help but thinking that perhaps that's the very thing, that perhaps that's where the movement is going, whereby we're almost retreating. We're not so much, yes, you will still find very good demonstrations, and you will still find very good rallies and political class action, and so it should be. And so it should be. But where's in the past you could get big turnouts. A big turnout now is 50 people. I mean, I'm not talking about a big demonstration in London where you get tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people, you know, or if, like, for example, there's a Tory conference going on, then you'll get, you know, thousands of people turning up to demonstrate outside of a Tory conference meeting. But at local level, whereas, for example, with the NHS, you might get thousands of people turning up for an NHS demonstration. When it comes to other subject matters, you're lucky if you're barely even getting 50 people. And that's not good. We should have thousands of people on every demonstration, on every subject matter, whether it's to do with welfare, whether it's to do with NHS, whether it's to do with the local ambulance service, you know, or childcare, you know, or to do with racism. You should get thousands of people at every turnout. And why is it that we're not at a local level? I'm not talking about the really big demonstrations, but locally, you're just not getting those sorts of numbers. In the time that I've been involved, you know, sometimes you're lucky if you're getting perhaps 100 people, which I suppose they say is pretty good, but you need to have the numbers are not a good thing, and how are people at local level building for these events? Now, and how is the word getting out there? That perhaps we would have more people if the word was really getting out there. And yes, social media is being used to spread the word, but then of course people forget that not everybody is on social media. So therefore there needs to be it's not just a question of perhaps putting out notices on social media and hoping that the word gets around, but there needs to be a better way of perhaps making sure that everybody gets to see these sorts of things and knows that these events are going on. And but I also think those people involved need to see, and I pointed this out to something not too long ago about consumerism, that, but they didn't want to see my point of view, or they didn't want to, they either couldn't get it, or they didn't want to get it. I don't know which one it was. And I pointed out that consumerism is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why since the 70s and 80s, and consumerism has been on the rise. And you think about it, if you're worrying about the latest TV, or the camera that you buy, or phone, or nice suite, nice chairs, nice tables, and whereas there's nothing new about these sorts of things, we live in a much more consumeristic age than what we were in the past. Computer games and so on, and then toys, and for kids and adults. One of the latest ones for adults has to be the drones, which have become very popular. And the thing is that perhaps this is part of the reason why there isn't so much of a big turnout with ordinary people at demonstrations. And I'll still say that because I think it's a very valid point, even if I'm going to be laughed at, because I think it's very important to say that, to acknowledge that perhaps the reason why there isn't the sort of turnout these days is because of consumerism. The Romans understood that if you put on games, gladiatorial games or other sorts of games, and if you fill people's lives with consumerism, they're less likely to be trying to overthrow the system, because they'll be content with having those sorts of things, and they'll be distracted by those things to the point whereby they'll stop worrying about the big issues in their lives, the fact that perhaps their lives are not good, and it's like buy more stuff, and therefore that will mean that they won't get so much involved in wanting to change the world for the better, because they'll be so concerned by more consumeristic items, better fridges, TVs, microwaves, cars, perhaps the other reason why people are not involved certainly at the local level as much as what they were in the past with street politics is perhaps because people feel as though they're powerless, and they've seen how politics has gone, whether that's at a low level or with the with the councils or with their MPs, whereby people have been asked to pay more and more money and getting less services, and they've had MPs who have not helped them out and have only turned up in their area when it's election time, and at the rest of the time they don't want to help them out. And politics has gone down a very bad place. The neoliberal agenda hasn't worked. The rich have gotten richer, austerity has done very well, has made the richest 1% even richer. The poor and disabled have suffered very badly under austerity, and they've been punished for being poor and disabled. But the neoliberal agenda, which has been going on for a long time, hasn't worked. It's failed. There hasn't been a trickle down. There hasn't been a sort of sense of well, if you don't tax the rich, then they spend money on the country. Well, politicians have not taxed the rich heavily, and what's happened? The rich haven't thought, oh well, we better give something back, and people haven't seen the benefits of that. So the neoliberal experiment of probably the last 40 or 50 years has been a complete and utter failure, and is still a failure. And so perhaps a lot of these things and the sort of dodgy dealings that goes on in politics, and has left people feeling powerless. But we need to show people that people do have power, and people are quite powerful. When thousands of people come together, then governments get worried, because they see that's something to be worried about. You end up with, I don't know, say 50,000 people, for example, or 100,000 people, or 1 million people out on the streets. Then the governments take notice. But we need to have that mass movement. We need to have a very strong movement. It's no good just having perhaps 50 good-willed people and that's it. We need to have big numbers. And we need to show people that coming together, you can make a change. And you can make a difference. But we need to have a movement that is strong in its voice and it has a power. And I'm not saying it doesn't, it does, but it has to maintain that power, and it has to not shrink away, or even worse, become like some sort of corporate thing, which I find quite worrying. That are we going to become, as I jokingly say, lefty PLC, where it becomes respectable and, obeys the rules of the system, because the system wants stuff like that. system doesn't want people to be out demonstrating. It doesn't want the unions to have power. Because it wants to control people and make sure that, you just put your cross on the box each 4 years and you vote for your MP. Half of the rights that we have not come from people taking part in parliamentary politics. And what I mean by that is I don't mean the actual MPs, but I mean by ordinary people voting. And yes, it's important to remember that people died and fought for the vote. That's important, and it's important that we don't have that taken away from us. But people wouldn't have had that right in the first place if it wasn't for people going out onto the streets and demonstrating and making a noise. Women wouldn't have the rights that they have if it wasn't for women preparing to take part in street action. The suffrage movement wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the fact that women were prepared to take risks. Whatever those risks were, whether it was being killed under the King's Horse in the 1900s, or working in arms factories in the First World War, or just going on hunger strike and being vocal on the streets. You don't get it by just pleading with the politicians and just saying, please, Mr. Politician, give us our rights, give us our liberty. And it certainly isn't going to come from being a corporate image, being part of some corporate movement, which is where I worry that the movement could go. Not just in terms of having corporate banners and corporate logos, but sort of like becoming almost too corporate. So like groups like the SWP, which will hand out tens of thousands of mass-produced placards for people to carry. Whereas there's nothing wrong with that. The thing is that that's taken away from the very heart soul of the movement. And are in danger of becoming too corporate, too sort of like a well-oiled corporate machine. I don't hate the SWP, unlike some, but and not just the SWP, but other sort of grassroots movements like this, which are sort of going down a route that perhaps they shouldn't be going. And yes, there are parties, so therefore they're a left-wing grassroots party, so obviously they're going to have their own image, and that's important, but to me, I think the left is about diversity, not about trying to wipe out the whole sense of diversity. and giving freedom to different voices and to sort of like listen to different arguments. We're not going to win the battle if we try to close down people's arguments. I've gone to meetings whereby almost everybody feels as though they have to almost agree with everybody, and it's like, well, if you say something completely different, then you're almost shot down in flames. And we should be encouraging debate. Debate is good. Debate is important. How do we have our ideas, and how do we know what to think and feel? Unless we encourage debate, unless we ask questions and think about different things, and for somebody else to come up with new ideas. And to, one of the greatest things I get is if you're speaking to somebody else who's of a like mind, if they come up with something and make you think of something in a completely different way, then perhaps you can think, oh yes, I haven't thought about that before. You see things in a totally different way. But if you try to get rid of that debate and sort of try to control it, then you're not doing yourself any favours. If we're about collectivism and individuality, then we should be encouraging that, not trying to get rid of that. I've heard of some of my friends who are on the left who have posted up the fact that some people will block them or get rid of them as friends the minute they say something which doesn't fit in with their own ideas. So if you don't follow the party line, then you can be blocked, or you can be defriended by somebody. And when I mean the party line, I don't mean literally one particular party. I don't mean like the SWP or the Socialist Workers' Party or the Communist Party of Great Britain or or the Green Party, which or so on and so on. I don't mean that sort of centred party line. What I mean is that some people just don't want to hear a diverse views. They don't want to sort of entertain different ways of thinking. And I find that quite worrying, because if you're, ironically, if you're putting out a banner about which says about diversity, and then at the other hand you're trying to make sure that only people think in one way or behave in one way, or that only certain, when we talk about race, only certain races are looked after, but we won't deal with these people over here or these people over there. Is that diversity? To me, diversity means everything. It's like it's like a zoo, so that you have elephants, you have giraffes, you have different fishes, different types of birds and animals. That to me sums up. I'm not trying to say that somebody's a giraffe or somebody's an elephant or something. Well, what I'm trying to say is that to me that's what diversity means. Like, if I say I'm using a broad range of colours on my palette, that means I'm using different blues, I'm using different greens, different reds, different purples. What I'm trying to say is that to me is what I would define as being diverse. It's not by saying, well, we're going to look after this group, we're going to stand with that group, or yeah, that one's fine, but we won't deal with that one, we won't deal with those people over there, because that we're not being told to look after those people, even if they're going through a really bad time of it, we're just going to leave them to suffer. We're only just going to look after these people, here. That's not diversity, that's selectivism. That's selecting who you stand by. To me, diversity means that you have to stand with everybody. You have to stand with every cause. You cannot just pick and choose. It cannot be just like what Woolworths, if anybody can ever still remember Woolworths, the pick and mix. The famous pick and mix, which I remember quite well, whereby you had your bag, you went in and you picked the sweets that you wanted, and obviously you only picked the ones that you did want. The left cannot be like that. It cannot be just a pick and mix. Sort of like, well, these are the causes that we're going to concentrate on, but we're going to ignore everything else, only these things, because these are the ones that are important. That's not diversity. Just concentrating on certain things is not diversity. We need to have diversity, and we need to allow people to have that freedom of differences of opinion, and to encourage differences of opinion, not to be trying to stifle it out, not to be trying to dampen it down. Which I'm sad to say that some people on the left want to do, and almost seem to don't sort of see where that could lead to, whereby if you end up with everybody saying the same thing, thinking the same way, and behaving exactly the same way, then that's sort of slowly but surely getting rid of that very diversity that you're supposed to be fighting for. And whereas at some point you have to come to a point whereby you have to agree with people of diverse views and of diverse opinions. If you try to stifle all of that, then that's no good. That's not how things should be. And I sometimes think that perhaps, there needs to be a reinvigoration of the movement and sort of like trying to bring it back to life. Not so much trying to go back to the past, but remembering the best of the past. But certainly not going down this sort of the way in which it's going right now. And it's, the history of grassroots activism has always been about people being vocal and people getting out there and fighting for what they believe in. The very word protest, derives from the word Protestant, and going back to the 1500s, when Martin Luther put up his document, I think it was on Cologne Cathedral's doors, whereby he listed a whole list of things which he thought was wrong with the Catholic Church. The Pope called these people within the Catholic Church which were complaining about how they were being treated Protestant, or Protestantation, because they were protesting. So the very word protest comes from there. And, you know, probably before the 1500s, but certainly way after that, there has always been a sort of grassroots political movement. I don't know, you know, how far back into history protests can be traced, but certainly by the 1500s and going way up into the 20th century, there's always been a grassroots protest movement. And people have been prepared to fight and die for what they believed in. You know, you have groups like the Tolpodal Martyrs who are prepared to literally fight and die for what they believed in. You have groups like the Luddites, many of which were killed. You have things like the Peterloo Massacre, which I think has just remembered its 200th anniversary since the Peterloo Massacre, where people were killed for coming out onto the streets of Manchester and were killed by the armed forces because they were fighting for their very existence, for their jobs, at the same time as the Luddite movement. And, you know, there has been, you know, I could carry on listing many different, you know, demonstrations throughout history, and people who were prepared to go to the streets to fight for what they believed in. You don't get that by shrinking backwards. You know, Martin Luther King, I think, understood fully well that perhaps, you know, one day somebody was going to kill him, and that happened, but he still fought for civil rights. And even though the fight for civil rights and for equality between black and white people, you know, is still an ongoing thing in the US and around the world, it was something like that was a significant movement in the 60s, sorry. And I heard about the other day how one of the members of the parachute regiment who was active on Bloody Sunday, which of course I guess that's why I was going to make a slip of the tongue, and that's why I almost said 70s, but there was obviously at the start of the Troubles, and inspired by Martin Luther King, there was obviously a civil rights movement in Northern Ireland, which started out in the late 1960s and went on into the 70s. So excuse me for my slip of the tongue there, by trying to almost say the 70s, when I meant to say the 60s over Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. But one of the members of the parachute regiment has finally been charged with the killing of the civil rights marchers on Bloody Sunday, who were unarmed, who were just killed in cold blood. Who were, you look at the movement, the civil rights movement in Ulster, it was ordinary Catholics and Protestants standing together, fighting for better homes and jobs, which was one of the sad things really, that when you think about Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, you think about them fighting each other, but for this instance they were actually standing together and seeing that perhaps their biggest struggle was against those that want to oppress them and want to keep them fighting one another. But it's always going to be risky taking part in such political action. Those people from the past and many other groups which I haven't mentioned, always knew that the system was always going to be against them. And there's never going to be okay with people coming out onto the streets, and demonstrating and standing up for their rights. The system doesn't want us to be doing such things. It wants us to be respectful and to sort of like, to only get involved in politics via the ballot box and no other means, because it fears a mass movement, and so it should do. But we can only have a movement that it's going to fear if that movement is not going to retreat. We need to have a strong movement, and a movement that is not going to go backwards. I'll spend my whole life fighting for what I believe in. And that's how I look at things, but we need to have a movement that is not going to retreat. And what I mean by this is that there is still a powerful voice there, and it's still going, and the movement hasn't died away, and I hope it never does. But if you consider that going back to the 1930s, when going back to the 1930s, the Nationalist Socialist Party, or the Nazi Party, came to power in Germany, and there is an interesting speech that Hitler made at the time, whereby he said he wanted to control I think somebody can pick me up on this one, I don't mind, but he said he wanted to control the press, he wanted to control the rights of the unions, and he wanted to stop people from demonstrating on the streets. There were many other things that he lists in this speech from 1933. You think about that for a moment. You think about how he wanted to control people's minds. So how do you do that? You control them through the media. Well, in this country we have the BBC, and the BBC doesn't produce news programs, it produces propaganda for the establishment, for the government. The current government in this country has tried to very much to sort of like do what Hitler tried to do, whereby he tried to control the unions, make it very hard for them to go on strike. The Tories have done exactly the same sort of thing. They have tried to make it very hard for there to be either an illegal strike or an official one, and to try and control the power of the unions, which they've been trying to do ever since the 70s, the Tories. And Labour, under the new Labour movement. And there has been restrictions put on place when it comes to public demonstrations, public protests. And I know that there was obviously resistance to Hitler in Germany on the left. But, as the opposition to him and to his right-wing fascist party, but this is part of how he maintained power, is by doing what he did do. We have a government now in this country that is doing exactly the same sort of things, which I would call fascism. And some people get upset when you use that phrase. You mustn't say that. You mustn't call them fascists. They're not part of the street movement. They're not part of the street right movement. But to me, I think that it is fascism, and we're getting slowly but surely, we're going down the route of we may still have a lot of freedoms that a lot of people around the world don't have. And thank goodness for that. But slowly, we're having those freedoms slowly but surely taken away. Social media is coming under some form of clampdown. You'll notice this going right across the board, whereby if you post up non-political stuff, you'll be left alone. You put up films of your cousin's wedding, you'll be left alone. The minute you put up anything which is vaguely political, it's either going to disappear, or in the case of YouTube, you might even have your channel suspended or closed down. And many people who are putting up things of a religious, political or conspiracy theory type nature are coming under attack. And quite a few times in the last couple of months, I've been put into Facebook jail. I've not been put into Facebook jail because of the amount of cat videos I put up. I've been put into Facebook jail because of the fact that I'm speaking out against the system. And if it hasn't happened to you, then it will do at some point. You know, and it's how the mainstream media are definitely wanting to attack social media. And this is one of the things. So our right of freedom of free speech is being slowly but taken away. The system's always going to be against people speaking out against the system and about fighting the system. You know. And is always going to be wanting to go down the route of trying to make it hard for the ordinary people to stand up against the system. Now, today's demonstration will have been organised weeks and months in advance. Today's So, you know, the system's always going to be against us standing up and fighting against the system. But one of the most varying things that I want to talk about, and I'm sorry this has been a bit of a strange video altogether, but you know, unfortunately with this webcam, you cannot just stop unfortunately, it's the problem with this technology. You cannot just stop it and pause it and then carry on going again. So I just had to just carry on going. But one of the things which I want to end with, which I think is one of the most important things, isn't talks about so much, and it's the fact that looking at the movement as it's going, you got the government trying to make it very hard for people to come out onto the streets and demonstrate, because that's not what they want. They don't want that. They don't want people, hundreds of thousands, out on the streets demonstrating. Now today's demonstration in London would have, as I said, been planned weeks and months in advance, and it would have been agreed on route, and so on and so on. I've been on those sort of big London demonstrations, and I know what they're like. And whereas there's nothing wrong with that sort of planning when it comes to big demonstrations, I think at a local level they're trying to sort of make it very hard for people to protest. But one of the worst things isn't so much the fact that the system's trying to do this and it's trying to make it very hard. It's the fact that the movement itself is almost wanting to sort of like, well, if they say how high to jump, that's how high we jump. If they say stand over there, we stand over there. I heard about, my friend showed me this thing, which is a movement which is growing certainly on the left in the UK, and they've got a branch here in Huddersfield, and throughout the whole of the United Kingdom, where it's called Extinction Rebellion, I think that's what it's called. But they're actually put down as a minutes of, things like when to put the banners up, when to take the banners down, make sure that the banners are easily to be taken down. All of these things which are there to please the police and to make the police happy. And slowly but surely I find this quite worrying, and this is what I want to end on, is that the movement is going down a route whereby it's almost, and whereas sometimes you have to liaison with the police on where you're going to be and all these sorts of things. Nothing wrong with that. But if we go down a route whereby we almost end up almost asking people if it's okay if we demonstrate, where does that lead us to? And it's something I find quite worrying. Are we going to end up in a situation where you end up having to have some sort of license to demonstrate? Or being told when you can and can't do it? And already, I've seen, how the government have tried to bring in laws to make it really difficult. But we need to have a movement which is going to be daring and to take risks. What's the point in respectfully standing over there and demonstrating when nobody's going to see you, nobody's going to hear you, where it's going to be away from anybody who's going to be affected by anything. You need to have a movement which is bold and is prepared to take risks and is prepared to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. Because sometimes in life, you have to do things which the government of the day or the civil authorities are not going to like. You know, because that's the only way in which they take notice. And even if it means breaking the law, then that's what you have to do. And sometimes, if you're having bad laws imposed on you, then you have to stand up against a totalitarian state or government. And whereas we're not quite there yet, many people say, oh no, we're not quite there yet. But the warning signs, I think, are starting to come in. And if you're not prepared to stand up against that, then sooner or later we won't have any rights. We won't have, all our rights will be taken away. And this is the very thing, is that if we're not prepared to have a movement that is strong enough to resist such things, then that could happen. And I find it quite worrying that, when you've got some of these older lefties who have been around for a long time, and they knew what it was like in the past. They fought against the fascists back in the 70s. And they stood up with the unions. And they knew that they had to stand and be bold and be brazen. They didn't have, and yet now, what are they trying to do? They're wanting to, the very same people, and this is what makes you quite cross and angry. I might be one of the younger ones, but I find that with some of the older ones now, they're almost wanting to shrink away, and to be very respectful, and to be, dare I say it, middle class, in their way of thinking and behaviour. Ironically, some of these ones are the people who still call themselves part of the working class, and yet they've become so middle class in their way of thinking. They've all got their homes, they've worked in quite a nice profession, but where has that sort of sense of drive gone to? We need to have that spirit, we need to have that power. We need to have that strong will. It's that strong will that wins in the end. It's not through, shrinking away. And we need to have a left which is going to be strong. And whereas it's never gone away, we need to have something which is going to have that power behind it. If we are to win, and if we are to fight for different causes, and to have an even stronger left than what we all currently have. And that's what I wanted to say in this video. Thank you. Goodbye.